Hello friends, welcome to one more session on sociology. So before we start what we are going to talk about, some basic announcements which we again do all the time. So in case you need some help with the preparation strategy, so I'm starting again. In case you need any help related to preparation strategy or answer writing, so the URLs are here, and whatever we are going to discuss today is going to be recorded and it will be there within 24 hours in the student portal, and the mentorship number is also here. So let's get started with today's discussion. In today's session, we are going to talk about these 5 topics, and again these topics are linked with different parts of both sociology paper 1 and sociology paper 2. One thing you might note here is, see, we have talked about all these things in the tablet recordings, but what happens is you will come across new studies, new data points, new empirical evidence, right? So in these topics, through this discussion, what we will do is we'll add some of these data points, right? Whatever you are already having. And in some of these cases, what I will do is I'll also revisit some of the theories that we have already talked about. So the first topic that we're going to talk about is caste dimensions of poverty and wealth, right? So caste, poverty, wealth. What is the linkage between these 2-3 terms, right? On one hand, we are talking about caste, right? If you look at the theory, right? What is caste? What kind of stratification is caste? It's a status-based stratification. Then how come caste is linked with poverty and wealth? Poverty and wealth, they are kind of an indicator of class situation, right? If you look at the way societies are stratified, they are stratified along the lines of caste, or along the lines of status rather, along the lines of power, along the lines of economic position, class, right? But here what we are talking is, we are trying to take two of these dimensions together, and we are trying to find out what is the linkage. So in this discussion, what we will do is, we will look at some evidences, right? How people who belong to certain castes, they might not have access to enough wealth, how they might be poorer, right? So basically what we are trying to say is caste and class can fuse together. So that is what we are going to discuss here. The next topic is related to tribal communities and COVID-19. So last 2 years and even now, right, we are in the middle of the pandemic. Now the pandemic has impacted us all, but the degree to which the pandemic has impacted different sections of the society is different. Tribal communities, for example, might have been impacted more, or the way the pandemic has impacted tribal communities might be different. So we will explore those dimensions, how tribal communities have faced different kinds of challenges during the pandemic, and now also they might be facing these challenges. See, why we are discussing all these things in UPSC Sociology paper 2, right? What happens is you will get questions where they will link things with contemporary issues, right? So you might be knowing about tribal communities, you might be knowing about all the major issues, but what they will try to do, they will try to link it with something which is happening right now, something which has happened recently, right? So how COVID-19 and tribal communities, what is the linkage here? We'll explore that. The next one is land tenure informalities and pandemic. So basically we will try to explore the linkage between, or the social relations between man and land, and how this linkage in case of India is. Usually we will have a lot of informal linkages. For example, a lot of people who are engaged in agriculture, right? So most of the people who will be engaged in agriculture, if you look at the numbers, right, they might not be owning land, but they will be cultivating on someone else's behalf. They themselves are not the owners of land. So there is some form of an informal arrangement over there. So how these people are getting impacted during the pandemic? Similarly, large number of people who are in urban areas, migrants who have come from rural to urban areas. Now they are also staying in some housing facilities, or it might, again, housing facility does not mean that they're staying in bungalows. What I try to imply here is they will also be staying somewhere. And maybe they're staying in slums, maybe they're staying in some cramped situation in one bedroom place where 5-6 people, 10 people are there. So different ways people stay in urban areas. But again, the engagement that is there, or the agreement that is there, or the kind of relationship that exists between those who own that property and those who are staying might be informal in nature. And whenever you have a thing like a pandemic, how these people who are, again, informal employees or who are informal tenants, how they get impacted, that is what we are going to talk about. The next topic, case studies on urban governance, urban issues, right? It is there in sociology paper 2. Like you have one section which talks about urbanization, industrialization, other things. So urban governance becomes a very important factor. Also, you can look at it from the perspective of politics, right? How you should have different levels of government, how local levels of government maybe should be in charge of urban governance. What should be the union's role when it comes to urban governance? What should be the state's role when it comes to urban governance? Right? From the perspective of politics, also you can look at it. Again, politics is part of the syllabus, or you can look at it from the perspective of urbanization. So what we will do is we'll try to understand what is urban governance. Then we will try to figure out what are some of the issues here, and we will look at some specific cases. For example, in Bangalore, what is happening? Like, I don't know how many of you are in Bangalore, but Bangalore is now back to almost the pre-pandemic level of traffic. Right? For 12 kilometers, it will take you more than 1.5 hours. That kind of situation is there. So it points to the fact that somewhere urban governance is not happening as expected. Right? And what could be the reason for it? We need to explore that. So this is what we are going to take up in the 4th topic. The last one is qualitative versus quantitative research methods. Now this is kind of an evergreen topic. Many times you have got questions from this. Sometimes you might be given a question, okay, write short notes on qualitative methods. In some other cases, there will be a short note on, there will be a question related to short notes on quantitative methods. Sometimes they will ask you what is the difference between these 2 methods. Right? So qualitative, quantitative research method is very, very commonly asked. So I thought I should just again explain this. It's kind of some of those, it's part of those important concepts that we try to have every session. Right? So these are 5 topics that we are going to take up from different parts of our syllabus. So let's get started with the first topic. Caste dimensions of poverty and wealth. Now I want to tell you what all I'll be taking up under this. So first what we will do is, we will see how some of the dimensions of caste have changed over time. How caste and poverty might be linked with one another. What could be some of the historical traditional reasons? Then we will refer to some empirical evidence, some recent findings, some study on poverty data, and what all they talk about caste dimensions, or what all they talk about those who are the marginalized communities, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, other backward classes. Then what we will do is we will try to look at some associated concepts, right? What is the linkage between caste and class? And we will look at all different kinds of perspectives here, whether caste and class they are different from one another, or whether there is an overlap between caste and class. And again, what can be one of those middle parts or middle viewpoints. So this is what we are going to take up. First, dimensions, how dimensions have changed, then some empirical evidences, and lastly, relation between caste and class. So let's get started. Now, look at some of the dimensions of caste. In caste, if you look at the traditional caste system, or traditionally what used to happen as part of caste system, there used to be a lot of restrictions on the basis of pollution and purity. For example, certain castes will be considered to be ritually pure. Certain castes are considered to be ritually impure, polluted. And again, between them, distance will be maintained. Certain kind of practices will be considered to be ritually pure. Certain kinds of goods will be considered to be ritually pure. And again, on the other hand, there will be some other goods practices will be considered ritually polluted. And separation has to be maintained. Distance has to be maintained between pure and impure, pure and polluted. So that used to be the case. But over a period of time, these restrictions might have gone down. Right? It's no longer similar level of restrictions are followed. Now also some form of restrictions might be followed, but not that level. Then there were different kinds of rules, regulations when it comes to commensality. Commensality refers to practices related to eating together or exchanging food. Right? Rules, regulations used to be there. From which caste, from which community you can take food, to which community you can give food. Those kind of restrictions. Can you sit together and eat? So caste system used to define that. Recently, you might have come across these instances, right? So you might have come across that particular. So if you're active on social media, I'm hoping most of you will not be active on social media, but this meme was going on, right, about how cultural differences can lead to certain kinds of behavior, and you won't expect that kind of behavior, and you might be shocked when you're meeting some people with certain kind of behavior, and this behavior is shaped by the cultural factors. Right? So there was this particular instance where a person tells that when he went to a Swedish person's place, he was not even offered food, and the members of the family had food, but they were not. That person was not given food. And a lot of people express their amusement. How this can happen? Right? You're going to someone's place, they are eating, but they're not even offering you food. Now, some people in India, they have actually pointed out that this is something which might even, you should not be amused, this is something that might be practiced in India, might be existent in India. They're saying that caste system is one of the systems, and this is used to be the case. Members from the lower caste might not be treated by the members of the upper caste, or members of the upper caste might not take food from members of the lower caste. Right? So what is this all about? Caste system is actually talking about all these different kinds of rules and regulations which have to be followed when it comes to exchanging of food. But all these rules and regulations also are not as strong, right? They have also become weaker over a period of time. So restrictions based on pollution purity, they have gone down. Commensality related rules and regulations, they have also come down. And there are different kinds of restrictions on social interaction. All these things have also gone down. Because again, as you're moving towards urbanization, as you're moving towards industrialization, you can't follow all these restrictions. Right? And people are also becoming more open. So all these dynamics have gradually changed. But does that imply caste system has become completely weak? There is, it's a totally caste-free society. That's not true. Now also, if you look at certain dimensions, people still follow caste, or caste still remains relevant. For example, when it comes to marriage, even now, when people are looking for alliances, one of the factors that they take into consideration is which, they marry within the same caste, right? Their partner is supposed to be from the same caste. Caste endogamy still existed. Right? 95% of the marriages, more than 95% of the marriages in India are within the same caste. Similarly, when it comes to politics, when it comes to accessing power, caste is still relevant. On the basis of caste, different kinds of alliances are formed. You will find horizontal mobilization as well as vertical mobilization on the basis of caste. So here also caste remains significant. And when it comes to wealth, here also caste plays a role. If you look at the way wealth is distributed within the community, within the societies, you will again find there is some dimension of caste. And this is something that we are going to talk about in detail. You look at some of the empirical evidence. Now, so these are areas where caste still remains relevant, and the justification for this we will see in a while. These are things which have possibly become weaker over a period of time. So now, what is the reason why you will find a linkage between caste and wealth? Right? Why members from lower caste, why members from the scheduled caste or scheduled tribes as well, why they are lagging behind when it comes to wealth accumulation? Maybe it is because for a long period of time they have been denied land ownership. They didn't have access to land. Apart from that, they have also faced different kind of restrictions when it comes to economic activities. Right? For example, when it comes to scheduled caste, so again, they will not be allowed to carry different kinds of economic activities. Mobility is something which is restricted when it comes to caste. There are different kinds of restrictions imposed. Right? You cannot take up any occupation. You are restricted to certain occupations. Right? So maybe there are restrictions on the economic activities which could have led to a situation where they don't have enough economic opportunities, which could have led to a situation where they don't have enough wealth. Now, how grave is the situation? Right? How skewed is the distribution of wealth? How poor are members from the scheduled caste community or lower caste community or OBCs or the scheduled tribes? Right? We'll look at some of these dimensions. So the first data point that we have, global multidimensional poverty index. So we have before talked about global multidimensional poverty index in details. What are the different parameters? We have talked about the benefits of it. What are the advantages that it offers? We have also talked about some of the limitations, right? That is also there. But it still continues to be one of those indexes which is used by countries world over. And in case of India, we don't have any official estimates, right? So again, we need to look at something like GMPI. And recently, NITI Aayog also collaborated with GMPI and they came up with what is called as the National Multidimensional Poverty Index. So just keep one thing in mind, that this particular index has been created by two institutions, United Nations Development Program, Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. Now, what are their finding when it comes to the poverty levels of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes, right? So they're saying that 5 of 6 people who are multidimensionally poor are from these marginalized, disadvantaged communities. So if 6 people are from poor, if 6 people are multidimensionally poor, 5 of them will be scheduled caste or scheduled tribe, or they will be from the other backward classes. And they have also found out the poverty levels. Among scheduled tribes, it is around 50.6%. Among scheduled castes, it is around 33.3%. Among other backward classes, it is 27.2%. Among the rest, it is 15.6%. Right? So just look at the numbers. Those who belong to communities which are not these ones, among them poverty rate is hardly 15%. But for scheduled tribes, it is massive, 50.6%, almost 3 times. In fact, more than 3 times. For scheduled castes, it is more than 2 times. Scheduled castes are twice as poor as others. Scheduled tribes are 3 times poorer as compared to others. Others here refers to non-scheduled caste, non-scheduled tribes, non-OBCs. So this is one particular indicator. Apart from this, there was this All India Debt and Investment Survey 2019. This was carried out by a government organization, National Statistical Office. They also find out that among scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and OBCs, you have disproportionately low wealth and assets. And again, assets here refers to land, buildings, livestock, machinery, bank deposits, shares, etc. Right? So they also find this out, find out the same thing, and their study was even more detailed. What they're doing is they're looking at rural areas, they're looking at urban areas. In rural areas, how scheduled caste, scheduled tribes are performing. In urban areas, how scheduled caste, scheduled tribes are faring. So all these data they have. So what are some of the findings? So in rural India, again, let's find the same thing, that scheduled caste and scheduled tribes are most disadvantaged. Average assets of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes is little more than half the average assets of all the rural households. So if you look at the average of all the rural households, let's say they have 100 units of assets. The scheduled caste members, scheduled tribe members on an average will have 50. Another point they find out, if you look at scheduled caste, scheduled tribes assets, and if you look at non-scheduled caste, non-scheduled tribe assets, right? So if you compare that, so average asset of scheduled caste, scheduled tribes is 1/3 the average assets of other households who are non-scheduled caste, who are non-scheduled tribes. So scheduled caste, scheduled tribes are like 1/3, or they are, or the other households are 3 times richer as compared to scheduled caste, scheduled tribes. So this is in rural India. But things are not much different in urban India. In urban India also, more or less similar kind of things you observe. So you would assume that in urban areas, since you have more economic opportunities, right, you have most likely more mobility, you have more jobs maybe. So all these things will lead to a situation where you can climb up the social ladder. But that is also not happening here. In urban India, they find out that scheduled caste average household wealth was about 2/3 of average household assets, other household assets. Scheduled tribe and OBC households average assets in urban areas was just about half of other social groups. So here also you find that scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, OBCs, they are lagging behind other social groups, right? So here also they are poor. So this kind of things you should keep in mind. Right? We generally think that urban areas might solve everything, but here also you find that maybe things are slightly better as compared to rural areas, but it is not equal. So urban areas also, maybe you're inching towards egalitarianism, but it is not equal. Now also you have inequality in urban areas. So these are some findings. Now this is one illustration that we have. It actually gives you an idea among different communities, right, how wealth is distributed. Like for example, scheduled tribe, 51% are poor. While look at Brahmins, like 4% will be poor, Rajput 7.3% will be poor. Scheduled caste, 28.4% are poorest. And again, you can look at the rich. The blue part shows who are rich, who are having more wealth, who are having more income. Right? So scheduled tribe, scheduled caste, it's very low. But for Brahmins, for Kayas, for Baniyas, right, certain caste groups, this is huge. And this again, government source, right? It's not something that has been done by some random organization. It's National Family Health Survey data. So again, all these things point to the fact that somewhere there is an overlap between caste, tribal identities, and class dimensions. Right? So we talk about all these things, but I thought since we are having some data, why not discuss it? And this is all based on an article that was there on TPW. So now, this is the first part, which talks about empirical evidence, which gives you an idea about how caste and poverty and wealth might be linked with one another. Now, what we will do is we'll try to understand the difference between caste and class. It's an associated concept, something which has been asked multiple times. And these kind of things can also be asked in general studies, by the way. And in sociology, again, you should be expecting these kind of questions. Right, so what is the difference between caste and class? And what is the linkage between this? Is there any overlap? Or over a period of time, has there been any convergence? Right, so we'll look at that. And then after this also, we'll see some other associated concepts. So what is caste? Caste, again, these are all groups, but these are groups which are based on ascription, ascriptive criteria. They are based on status, style of life, and again, occupation is fixed. I'll just explain it further. What is ascriptive criteria? On the basis of birth. Caste is decided on the basis of birth. You are born in a particular family. That family has a particular caste. So the person who is born in that family will get the same caste. And it is passed on from generation to generation. So it is hereditary. Caste and occupation, they are linked with one another. Different castes will have different occupations. Right? So each caste will be linked with one occupation. So you are born in a particular caste, you will take up the occupation of the same caste. And there is some status associated with caste. Certain castes are considered superior, certain castes are considered inferior. So there is one hierarchy which is called as the regional hierarchy. So in that hierarchy, there are again different castes which are ranked. So these are all status groups. And status is based on these things. Now, social honor is associated with ritual values. Right? So how social honor is decided on the basis of ritual values, and some are higher in the ritual hierarchy, some are lower in the ritual hierarchy. And it is a closed system. What do you mean by closed system? Closed system is one in which there is restrictions on mobility. You cannot move from one position in the social hierarchy to another position in the social hierarchy. Let's say this is society. This is the hierarchy. This is the top. You're at the bottom. So if a society is based on caste system, what will happen? You'll have certain castes here. You'll have certain castes here. C1, C2, C3, etc. But it is very difficult to change one's position from here to here. There will be massive resistance. And just think of it. In a caste-based society, occupations are pre-decided. Right? When you're born, your occupation is decided. You're born with a caste, and the caste has a fixed occupation. If someone is born as a barber, he or she has to work as a barber. If someone is born as a goldsmith, that person has to work as a goldsmith. Someone is born as Devi, who extract oil, they have to continue extracting oil. So you can't take up different kinds of occupations. You can't explore different kinds of economic opportunities. So the number of options that you have is limited. So if that is limited, how will there be mobility? So a lot of restrictions in mobility. Maybe some variations are allowed, maybe some changes are allowed, but mostly it is a closed system. So this is what caste looks like. But when it comes to class, there is slight variation. In this, social honor is associated with ownership or non-ownership of means of production. So what kind of assets you own? How productive are these assets? Right? On the basis of that, honor is associated. If you own assets, you will have more honor maybe. If you don't own these assets, you might not have this kind of an honor. Actually, this is mostly the Marxist definition, right? Means of production, who owns it, who doesn't own it, has and has not. And class is something which is more open, which is more fluid. There is possibility for people to move up. It's not something which is rigid. It keeps on changing. Someone might be born at a lower position in the class hierarchy. That person's family right now is in the lower position of the class hierarchy. They don't have any assets, they don't have a good position in the market, they can't draw rewards from the market. But this individual, on the basis of his talent maybe, on the basis of his hard work maybe, can move up the social hierarchy, can move to maybe middle class, upper middle class, higher classes. And there are so many examples of this. Like all these rags to riches story are example of that. And there is possibility of individual upward mobility. So this is the difference between caste and class. And what Weber used to say? Weber used to say that if you look at society, you will find inequality, you will find hierarchy, and this hierarchy can be along three lines. It can be on the lines of caste, it can be on the lines of status. Example of that is caste. It can be on the basis of class, it can be also on the basis of power, party. Right? So two dimensions we are talking about at this point. Now this is how it looks like. Now what have some thinkers mentioned about this? Right? Who all agree with it? So some thinkers that you can see here, they all agree that caste is a status-based stratification. Again, you might not agree with their viewpoints, but again, they have their own viewpoints here. For example, Edwin Leach, he says, caste is about cooperation, while class is about competition. He has his viewpoint. What he's saying is members of one caste, they cooperate with members of other caste. Maybe he's referring to things like Jajmani system. Right? Different castes, they have their own occupation, and one caste will carry out its occupation, will provide some goods and services. The other caste will take the goods and services from this caste. And again, this particular caste will take up something else. They will produce certain goods and services. Some other caste will take it from them. So this is how he views it. That among caste groups you have cooperation, and among classes you have competition. This is what Edmund Leach has said. And again, there are a lot of criticism of this particular viewpoint as well. Now, Weber says that caste is a status-based stratification. It's like one of those advanced forms of status-based stratifications. Louis Dumont, he says caste is on the basis of hierarchy. It is on the basis of difference between pure and impure. Right? So certain castes, they are considered to be ritually pure, certain castes are considered to be ritually impure. And again, there are intermediate castes. So on the basis of pollution and purity, you will have different caste groups. Right? So this is what Louis Dumont talks about. But not everyone will look at caste like this. Mostly people here are talking about status, right? Caste is status. It's only about status. Some thinkers, they think that it is not just about status. There are some overlaps with class as well. There is some linkage between caste and class. So who are these thinkers? Now, one example I can give you here is, you will find these kind of associations. Jat Sabha, Kisan Sabha. Now, from the terms, you can get an idea that, again, Jat Sabha, for example, this is basically a group of people who belong to a particular caste. But these groups are trying to further certain economic interests. Economic interest of maybe the Jat members. Kisan Sabha, again, it might have membership of people from a certain caste. But they are also trying to promote certain economic interests. So these kind of groups, these kind of caste associations are actually representing class. So here caste and class, they are not separated from one another. Caste and class, they are not existing in vacuum. They are not necessarily ideological opposites. Similarly, some other viewpoints are the linkage between ritual status and secular benefits may be initially the overlap, which implies those who are at the bottom of the ritual hierarchy, those who are considered to be polluted, those who are considered to be impure, they also did not enjoy secular benefits. They were lagging behind when it comes to wealth. They were lagging behind when it comes to land ownership, maybe. They were lagging behind when it comes to income. Right? So their class position and their ritual position, both was at the bottom maybe. So it initially overlapped. But over a period of time, there has been divergence. You will find communities which are considered to be ritually impure. But over a period of time, they have improved their position when it comes to the secular hierarchy. Some have formed different kinds of guilds. They have been part of trade. They have owned land. They have initiated different kinds of banking systems. So the ritual hierarchy and the secular hierarchy might not be overlapping. In the past, it might have overlapped. Andre Bete, he says hierarchies of caste and power in the village, they overlap. But sometimes they cut across as well. Now, what is the meaning of this? If you say hierarchies overlap, that means those who are at the bottom of one hierarchy, let's say this is one hierarchy, this is another hierarchy. Let's say this is caste hierarchy, this is power hierarchy. So if the hierarchies are overlapping, that means a particular community which is lower in the caste hierarchy will also be powerless. A community which is higher in the caste hierarchy, who is considered to be ritually pure, ritually superior, they are also powerful. So Andre Bete is saying that in some cases, this overlap can happen. You are at the bottom of the caste hierarchy, you are at the bottom of the power hierarchy, you are at the top of the caste hierarchy, you are also at the top of the power hierarchy. But this might not always be the case. There might be instances where you will have castes which are not ritually superior, but they would have commanded power. Maybe they have a lot of numbers, right? So they were maybe intermediate caste, but since they have large numbers and you have universal adult franchise, right? Those who have the numbers, they are the ones who will get elected. They are the ones who will have an advantage in the country's elections, and they have become powerful over a period of time. So some cases it overlaps. In some cases, these hierarchies might not overlap. This is what Andre Bete says. Kathleen Goss says caste and class, there is some form of a nexus. There are interconnections between caste, marriage, kinship. Some linkages are there. It's not something which is divorced from one another. Yogendra Singh says caste and class, they represent the same reality. It's not much different. More or less, caste and class, they are linked with one another. They're reflecting the same thing. There is massive overlap here. John Venture says caste system is basically a tool for economic exploitation by dominant class. So again, economic factors comes into being here. Like how one class exploits another, same thing is happening here. Dominant caste is exploiting other castes, and they're economically exploiting them. So these are some viewpoints. Apart from that, other studies, they also find out that certain kinds of occupations. Occupation implies class dimension, economic activity. You'll find certain kinds of occupation. You will find people from particular castes. Manual scavenging, for example, you will find mostly all the manual scavenging goes, though it has been again abolished, banned by the constitution. Still, these kind of activities are carried out. Sweeping, you will again find out people from certain castes, usually the lower caste. So there is high overlap at the top and the bottom level. Sangeeta Rao says, if castes are detached from religion, class may run parallel to caste. So somewhere, caste has only that religious-based affiliation, or else caste is more or less like class. And the last inference, caste has inherent class, and class is also inherent caste. What is the meaning of inherent? It is inside. It is an essential part now. It exists within. So what it implies is caste is inside class, class is inside caste. So more or less they're overlapping one another. There is not much distinction. So what I want to say here is, so if you look at Weber's approach, right, he's making a distinction. Right, societies are divided on the basis of this. Societies are stratified on the basis of this. Right, one axis of stratification is status, another axis of stratification is power, another axis of stratification is class. But these three axes of stratification might have some form of overlaps. And here what we are seeing is caste is a status-based stratification. We would assume that caste and class are completely separate, which implies that someone who is maybe higher up in the caste hierarchy need not necessarily be higher up in the class hierarchy, but that might not be completely true. There are massive overlaps as these different studies point out. Right, so this is what I wanted to talk about, the linkage between caste and class, and already whatever data you have, the global MPI data or the depth and investment survey data, all India depth and investment survey data, they also point in the same direction. So this is largely about the topic. Just one or two concepts are there. I mean, you might come across these terms, so I thought I'd just talk about it. One is dispersed inequality. Second is cumulative inequality. So sometimes you might get short notes on these kind of things, right? Or they might ask you, what is the difference between dispersed inequality and cumulative inequality? Or sometimes as part of larger questions, right, these terms can be there. Caste is an example of the nature of caste has been changing from cumulative inequality to dispersed inequality. So in these kind of scenarios, how do you answer it? It's only when you know these terms you can answer it, right? So that's why I thought just explain these terms. So dispersed inequality means where a section of people who are unequal in one parameter might not necessarily be unequal in other parameters. That is dispersed inequality. Let's say there is one caste group which has a lower status in the caste hierarchy, the social hierarchy. But this particular caste is powerful. Members of this particular caste also have good amount of resources maybe. So this is an example of dispersed inequality. Right? Few slides back, I had shown you one illustration. Yeah. So you can find one thing. Members of, let's say, caste community, they're not necessarily at the top of the caste hierarchy, but you will find that they're having significant amount of wealth. Right? In fact, they're the richest among all communities, or among them the poverty rates are lowest. Right? So they're not at the top of caste hierarchy, they're somewhere at the bottom, but when it comes to the class position, they're at the top. So this is an example of dispersed inequality. Now, what is cumulative inequality? Section of people, if they face multiple forms of inequalities, that is cumulative inequality. So that means the same community is lower in the status hierarchy, it is lower in the power hierarchy, it is also lower in the class hierarchy. Then it is cumulative inequality. Members of the scheduled caste community, right, can be at the bottom of all these stages. Also, the other way around. If a particular community is at the top of the status hierarchy, it is at the top of class hierarchy, it is also at the top of power hierarchy. Again, cumulative inequality. Right? So dispersed means you are at one position as per one hierarchy, in another hierarchy you are at a different position. Cumulative inequality, you are at the same position along the hierarchies. So these kind of terms you should be aware of. Another term, or two terms rather, harmonic system, disharmonic system. Right? So what is the meaning of these two terms? In a harmonic system, there is consistency between normative order and existential order. So what is the meaning of normative order, existential order? Normative order means the order as per the values, as per the norms. Existential order means what is the reality. So in simple words, if the values, norms are saying something and the reality also reflects that, then it is called a harmonic system. Example, right? If society is divided into groups in which people are placed high and low, and people think, the value system also talks about these things, that there will be some form of inequality. There will be some people who are high, some people who are low. And it is something which is kind of natural for any society. For example, caste system talks about that, right? There will be some people who are at the top, there will be some at the bottom. So the norms are saying that. And in reality also that is the case. Some people are at the top and some people are at the bottom. So this is an example of a harmonic system. Disharmonic system is an opposite of that. In this case, what is happening is there's a lack of consistency. So norms are saying something, but existential order is something. For example, if you say, especially this Western modern society, all of them will say that we should have equality. Everyone should be equal. Everyone should have equality of outcomes. But in reality, what happens? Not everyone is equal. There will be some who are wealthier, some who are poorer. There are some who are having more power. There are some who are having less power. There are some who have higher status. There are some who have lower status. So their norms are talking about equality, but in reality, you have variations. So that is an example of a disharmonic system. Modern industrial societies are an example of that. So sometimes these kind of concepts might be asked. These kind of terms might be asked. So that's the reason I'm explaining all these things, or we are discussing all these things. So let's look at one question. Do you think caste and class overlap with each other? Analyze how the hierarchies in both are intertwined with respect to poverty and wealth. Right? So again, all the things that we have talked about. If you answer this question, you'll be able to summarize it. So do you think caste and class overlap? So you can talk about what is caste, what is class, how they are supposed to not overlap. Then you can talk about how there can be overlap. You can talk about the different theories. You can also talk about the different data points, right? The things that we talked about. Analyze how the hierarchies in both are intertwined with respect to poverty and wealth. All the empirical evidence that we talked about. So answer this question. If you're answering this question, if you're writing down the answer, then all the things that we have talked about, it will get summarized. So this is the first topic. Now the next topic is tribal communities and the pandemic. So I'll just signpost what all we are going to talk about. First thing, we look at the size of the tribal communities. Who are the tribal communities? Then we will see how the pandemic has impacted the tribal communities. What are the different dimensions along which they have been impacted? So if you have questions till now, I will take it up, or else we can move. Earlier, so you have a question. Do you really believe upper caste had good accumulation of wealth? So you can just, I'm not believing anything, and it's not about belief, it's about data. So you can just look at So look at the data point here, and again, what does the data say, right? You will find that those who are from the upper caste communities, they will, the blue parts that you see, it basically reflects the richest section. So among the upper caste communities, you will find there is significantly large proportion of people who are rich. Now see, this does not imply that everyone who is from the upper caste community will be rich. What you are trying to do is you are trying to find out what proportion of these particular castes you will find people who are affluent. And this is again data, National Family Health Survey. You can also look at recent data, you can also look at MPI data, right? So what you believe or what I believe, you believe doesn't make, it might not be as important as data that you have. Right? So I will always suggest look at the data, and maybe some of these things can get clarified over there. And also just look at the comparative picture. Scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, the lower caste, where they stand. And this particular illustration is also there in your handouts. You can also cross check it once. The webinar is still 12:30. Sonali asks, is it possible to eradicate inequality? See, Sonali, there are two things here. One is, what kind of inequality would you want to eradicate? Now, inequality is also at multiple levels. One is inequality of opportunity. Right? There will be some people who do not even have access to basic things, food, education, skill development, healthcare. Well, there will be some who have access to all these things. So ideally, we would want people to have access to all these things, right? Basic access should be there. Those who are at the bottom, and they should also have some level of basic access to all these things, because these are all essential for human survival. Why are we even having a state, right, if we can't provide for this? So this kind of an inequality needs to be tackled, right? You need to have equality when it comes to opportunity. Now, another kind of inequality is how much wealth you have, or what is the output basically, right? How much wealth you have, how much incomes you have over time. Now, here again, complete equality is something which is not advisable. Let's say you are working hard and I am not working hard, but you say that no, everyone should be equal, irrespective of whoever works hard, whoever doesn't work hard, everyone should get same salary. So this kind of equality might not be advisable. This is called equality in terms of outcome. Because if you say that everyone should be treated equally, everyone should be given same compensation, same rewards, then person who is talented, the person who is hardworking will not work hard, because they know that they're not going to get the right incentives. So inequality in terms of outcomes is something which is not desirable. Inequality in terms of outcomes is desirable. Inequality in terms of inputs, right, that is undesirable. Everyone should have access to some common basic facilities. Now there's another question by Sri Deepika. Does this mean that though we have many constitutional provision schemes for upliftment, they didn't have impact? Why would this happen? No, that doesn't mean that. So what you are trying to see, what you look right now is absolute numbers, right? At this point of time, this is the poverty rates. you need to compare it with the poverty rates of, let's say, 1980s, 1970s, 1950s, 1960s, right? You need to look at the wealth rates of 1980s, 1960s, 1970s. Then only you can draw a comparative picture. So the different schemes, policies that we have had, it has definitely benefited scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, right? As compared to what the situation was in the 50s, 60s, things have moved in the positive direction. But more needs to be done. That is the only thing that we can infer here, right? So never base your conclusions on the basis of absolute numbers. Fatima says, sir, so in this regard, equity is a more stable option than equality. Fatima, I really appreciate that you have an idea about the difference between equity and equality, right? So equality and equity, some of you might not be knowing it. Equality means everyone is treated equal, right, irrespective of where you are. Equity means those who are more vulnerable, those who require more support, they are provided more support. And I completely agree with you, Fatima. Equity is something that has to be given more importance. Right? If you say we will have equal treatment, that means everyone should be treated equally. Everyone should be given some form of a direct benefit, 5,000 rupees per month, irrespective of their wealth situation. So Ambani is also getting 5,000 rupees from the government. I am also getting 5,000 from the government. Someone who is poor is also getting 5,000 rupees from the government every month. Does it make sense? No. Someone like an Ambani or someone like me, I mean, again, I'm not saying I'm affluent, but I don't need 5,000 rupees from the side of the government, right? So equity implies those who need it, right? Those who are the most poor, those who are the poorest, they should be provided more benefits. Yeah. So let's move to the next topic, COVID-19 and tribal communities. So let's see what all we are going to talk about. First thing, how did the pandemic impact the scheduled tribes? Also, basically here is the pandemic happened and what all problems, challenges, issues scheduled tribes faced. But there's a larger question also. See, the scheduled tribe members, they have been staying away from other sections, other parts. They have been in the forest dwelling communities. They have been staying in inhospitable terrains. The different kinds of services a citizen gets, these citizens might be restricted to them. Different kind of public services from the side of the government might not reach to the tribal communities. Right? So all these things have been happening in the past as well. But all these things are now coming to the forefront because of the pandemic. So what we are indirectly saying is, maybe the pandemic impacted them. It basically brought to the forefront all the challenges they have been facing. So we'll look at both these dimensions. Also, maybe the pandemic has disproportionately affected some communities, and among them, one of the communities might be the tribal communities. So first of all, scheduled tribes. What is their proportion in the population? What are some of the characteristics of scheduled tribes? Now, I would suggest in Sociology paper 2, there is one section related to scheduled tribes, tribal communities, right? So you refer to that. Right? Who are the tribes? What are the different kinds of controversies, different kinds of viewpoints? Right? How do you distinguish between tribe and peasants? How do you distinguish between tribe and caste? Right? So all these definitions problem. Right? It is very difficult to define who is a tribe. In fact, there is one section which talks about that. How do you define a tribe? So refer to that for more details. But keep in mind, tribal communities, they are a significant part of the population. They constitute around 8.6% of the total population, and they are characterized by isolation, economic backwardness, poor infrastructure, and poor quality of healthcare, lack of access to healthcare. So they have been isolated, they have been staying in inhospitable, inaccessible terrains. If you look at their occupations, right, primitive occupations, hunting, herding, gathering, some form of primitive modes of agriculture. They were not using a lot of machines and automation in their agriculture. A very primitive way of functioning. So this is the characteristics of tribes. Now, among tribal communities, scheduled tribes, again, look at the poverty rates. 45.3% rural areas, urban areas 24.1%. National average is this. Now, you might observe that there is slight variation here and the one that we saw last time, I mean, in the previous topic, that was global MPI data. This is census 2011 data, right? So some variation will be there because we had a session on how to compute poverty rates and we have seen that. The different parameters that you take, it will again decide, right? What is the poverty numbers. So now let's look at how the tribal communities are impacted. We'll look at each of these dimensions one by one. First of all, lockdowns, confinement measures during the time of the pandemic. Right, so we had multiple lockdowns. You had in 2020, if you remember the month of March, right? You had that 3-week lockdown, which was again extended by 1 week, and so on. And after that also we have had lockdowns. Some of the lockdowns were national lockdowns. In some cases it was state lockdowns. Some cases it was regional lockdowns, district-based lockdowns on the basis of district. So the point I want to make here is the lockdowns impacted the tribes, but again the impact varied from place to place, from region to region, and also the impact depended on the occupation of the tribal members. Right? What kind of occupation they were engaged in. In some cases they might be more impacted. In some cases they might not. We'll see that. Now there are around 1.5 to 2 million tribal people who work as migrants in different parts of the country. Right, so maybe these members are from the state of Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, but they might be working in Bombay, Pune, Chennai, different places of the country. Now, during the lockdown, what happened? Suspension of different kinds of economic activities. Manufacturing sector, services sector, they're all shut down for a while. Many places workers were just laid off. They're not given salaries, they were laid off, there was wage cuts. And all these things, if you had a proper social security mechanism, all these things could have been possibly taken care of. Right? The government could have taken up these things. But that also was not the case, right? There was absence of social security. As a result of which, they had to witness massive financial distress. So you would have observed the migrant crisis. And some of the people who were part of the migrant crisis were the tribal members. They faced all these financial distress. So social security mechanisms should have kicked in the moment you had all these things, which did not happen. In fact, some places, yes, we had appropriate social security measures, but not everywhere. And again, things happened at a very quick pace, right? So again, to grapple with the situation was difficult. Now, next thing, I wanted to show you this image, and you can just put it in the chat box. What is happening here? These are some tribal ladies, and they are doing something. They're manufacturing something. Any idea what they are manufacturing? You can put it in the chat box. And there's a hint here: sale of forest produce. Certain kind of forest products, tribal women, they produce and they sell. Yeah, Sonali has got it right. Tindu leaves for beading manufacturing. Some people have talked about bamboo products, cabbage. This is not cabbage. This doesn't look like cabbage. So maybe the resolution of the image is not good, but this is an unexpected answer. It's not cabbage. So basically, these are some female tribal members. They have collected tindu leaves, and from that they're making beedis. Beedi cigarette. Not the glory, the poorer cousin of cigarette maybe. So they are manufacturing that, they're producing that, and they sell it in the market. So the point here is, tribal members, women, and again men, they collect different kinds of products from the forest, right? And they're dependent on the minor forest products, and they sell it outside in the markets. Now, because of the pandemic, their businesses were impacted. Many of the weekly markets were not operating. Many places, since there were lockdowns, they were not allowed to go. So all these had a bearing on their livelihood. What are some of the commodities that they collect and sell? Right? So mostly it is minor forest products, medicines, herbs, honey, all these kind of things. Usually in the summer season. Because of the lockdown, they could not sell this thing. Weekly markets were closed. And Adivasi women were left behind. They did not have any earnings. Right? So this is one of the issues they faced. So their earnings incomes, they're all getting, I mean, they don't have any earnings. Apart from that, many of the members of the tribal communities, they provide different services. They go from one place to another. They sell different kinds of goods. Because of the pandemic, some of these members, they were stigmatized. They were not allowed to go to other villages. There were different kind of restrictions. In some cases, the restrictions from the side of the government might not have been there. But in the new cases, right, they would have been, the tribal members would have been discriminated. That, okay, you are someone who's carrying the virus. They were labeled as coronavirus carriers in some places. So that stigmatization was also there. Many of the nomadic tribal communities, they were left with no government support. Nomadic tribal community means those communities which move from one place to another. Right? They don't have any fixed place. From one place to another, they keep on moving. When you are moving from one place to another, what happens? I mean, you will find it difficult to avail different kinds of government services, right? Maybe you won't have access to, you might not have the right kind of documents and other things. Maybe these people were taking up different kinds of occupations. Wherever they will go, they will find out some economic opportunity and they'll take it up. But during the time of the pandemic, all the economic opportunities were more or less curtailed. Manufacturing sector, service sector, everything was curtailed. And on top of that, people's movement is also restricted, right? So maybe the nomadic communities would have provided some services or could have sold some goods. They're not able to do that. On top of that, not much government support they're getting. So their situation was even worse. Now, in some cases, this is usually the case. Members of the tribal communities, many times, they have faced violence. They have been thrown out of their land. We have certain legal mechanisms which protects them, which ensures that land is not, they're not alienated from their land. They have been staying in certain land for ages now. They might be cultivating on the same land, right? So there are certain kinds of mechanisms. For example, you have the Forest Rights Act. These are all legal safeguards, but many of these legal safeguards has not been implemented effectively. So if you have to take the land on which tribal members have been traditionally staying, they have been cultivating, you have to take the approval of the communities. Right? Gram Sabha's consent has to be taken. But many times all these things don't happen as expected. Right? So the legal mechanism is there, but it is not effective. Different kind of fraudulent measures are taken. Many times what will happen? There will be legal cases going on forever. And tribal members might not have enough resources to fight these cases. Many times they're not even told about these processes and the land is taken. And during the pandemic, these things continue to happen. So all these things went on as it was going on before. What about healthcare opportunities, healthcare facilities? During the pandemic, one of the most important resource that you needed access to was healthcare facilities, right? But what about tribal members? They're already in inaccessible areas. They are the forest dwelling communities. They don't have access to basic amenities. When it comes to healthcare, again, they don't have access to the basic health facilities. So there was one study which found out that there is shortage of infrastructure in tribal areas where primarily you have tribal members. So you don't have enough sub-centers, primary health centers, community health centers. These are all health facilities which provided primary health services. Right? They are the first point of contact between citizens and the healthcare personnel. So there is shortage. On top of that, there's vacancies. The people who are supposed to be in these primary health centers, the doctors, the nurses, right, the assistants over there were a lot of vacancies here. And if you look at the health situation, 44% of tribal children under the age of 5 years are stunted. 45% are underweight and 27% are wasted. Right? So already the children are not doing well. On top of that, you have a pandemic. Right? So it might be very difficult for them to fight the pandemic in case they're getting the virus. And resources are already spread. So during the pandemic, this is something, one more layer of issues. For people who are in urban areas, you still have access to healthcare facilities. And there also there was massive amount of competition, right? For one ventilator, for one ICU bed, there were so many people who were competing. And in these places, you don't even have those amenities. So that was the situation of tribal members during the pandemic. And the last part, what about education? In urban areas or in smaller towns as well, kids are going to schools. And because of the pandemic, because of the social distancing norms, right, the schools were closed. But education continued through different other media. For example, online media came up. But members of the tribal communities, their children, where do they go? Which kind of schools they usually go? Most likely they will go to ashram schools. They are residential schools in tribal areas. These are all closed. So the learning opportunities that tribal members could have had is missing now. So online education and other avenues are not available. So it is something which is impacting the learning outcomes. And keep in mind, the thing that they have lost now, 2 years, the learning opportunity they have lost, it is now going to have an impact on their skill development. It is going to have an impact on their ability to gain jobs later on. So if we are saying that the members of the scheduled tribe communities are here and the members of other communities are here, this is the difference. But because of loss of learning, this difference can increase in future if you are not having appropriate policy interventions. So this is something which is a cause of concern. Already you have inequality. This inequality can increase further because of lack of options, lack of opportunities. Right? So this is how tribal members were impacted during the pandemic. Now, why are we having a discussion like this? As I mentioned, in Sociology paper 2, right, you have these traditional topics. Who are the tribals? How do you define a tribe? What are some of the traditional issues? But in the question paper, you might get questions related to this. Direct questions can be there. But many times they will link it with contemporary issues. Some new kind of issues that might have emerged. Some new kind of problem a particular group is facing. So they will converse that. So since we are in the middle of the pandemic, we need to understand the different dimensions of this. How it would have disproportionately affected certain communities. And tribal communities are one of those communities. Right? So we need to look at these dynamics so that we should be better prepared for our exams. So let's look at one question. Examine how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the lives of tribal communities in India. Mention various initiatives taken by the government in this regard to mitigate these impacts. So there are two parts here to the question. Right? One is how the tribal communities have been impacted. Second part is what the government did to mitigate the impact. Now, all the things that we discussed, if you can summarize it, it will be part of the first part. Right? You can easily answer how communities got impacted. Second part is an assignment for you. You have to go and find out what were some of the initiatives on the sector. And again, here think about multiple things, right? What kind of income support was provided? What kind of market support was provided? Right? You had all these direct benefit transfer and other things, right? What was that? What was the amount? How many tribal members were covered under that? Think about how healthcare facilities was provided. The government is coming up with vaccination drive and other things, right? In difficult terrains, in inhospitable terrains, in inaccessible terrains. How is government carrying out with these initiatives? For booking these slots, right, you need access to technology and other things. How is government trying to address that? When it comes to education, members from the tribal communities, children from the tribal communities are lagging. Where are some of the options which are explored? Radio, TV, and other things. So the second part, you have to figure out Again, this is something that you can get from current affairs, right? If you are following current affairs, if you are skilled enough to Google search, you'll be able to find some ways, right? So first part, what was the impact of the pandemic on tribals? Second part, what the government did. And while you are concluding, you can just mention maybe these are some of the things that can be done further. So this is the question that you have to answer.